everybody, and welcome back to day 5 of the holiday card series. We're going to be using some products today from Simon Says Stamp. We're using the Dots on Dots stencil as well as the Bold Merry Christmas stencil, and we're going to use the Outline Merry Christmas background stamp with 2 colors of ink. We have SEAFOAM and Ocean. All right, let's get into the card making today. So I went ahead and I grabbed my Misty, and I did make sure to take out my foam piece. In here I have a piece of SEAFOAM, no, I'm sorry, this is Sea Glass cardstock, also from Simon Says Stamp. I'll be sure to link all the products down below. I did put a little bit of adhesive on that paper so I can stick it into the lid of my Misty. Now I do want to come in with some of that SEAFOAM ink. Now, if you want to do this technique, I suggest you start off with colored cardstock. That's going to make this process so easy. Another tip I want to make sure that I express to you is to make sure you use a good amount of ink. So I'm using 2 inks as you saw earlier, but quote, my third color is going to be the paper itself. Now I'm going to come in with that Bold Merry Christmas stencil. I'm going to place that down towards the center of this card piece. Now I did make sure to use some PIXIE spray, which is a temporary adhesive, on that Merry Christmas, because I really need to make sure that stays in place. Next, I'm going to go back into that SEAFOAM ink. And to make this technique work, you want to make sure you get enough ink covering up every single one of these letters. Because we're stenciling over this Merry Christmas and we started with that color cardstock, we're going to be able to see that Merry Christmas through this ink. But the key to doing that is making sure you put down a good amount of ink, making sure to go in between the letters and all around them. As you can see, it's not very hard to do. And as I apply the ink, you're really starting to see the stencil a little bit more than my ink blending. And that's the key. You want to make sure you have down a lot of ink, so when you pull the stencil off, you're going to get a good contrast between those colors. All right, as I finish this up, as you can see, it did not take long at all. But now we need to step this up a notch. I'm going to go ahead and set this ink aside, and I'm going to bring in my Outline Merry stamp. This is a beautiful background stamp. Now, if you're new to my channel, welcome, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. If you are revisiting for the holiday card series, hello everyone and welcome back. I went ahead and placed that large background stamp right on top of that stencil. This is going to kind of give us this really great background with our sentiment raised, but it's actually still inset into the card. I'll show you how that's going to happen. I'm using that Ocean ink, and I'm making sure to press that ink everywhere because this is all a line design, but it repeats the Merry Christmas theme, which I think is beautiful. Now, when you're doing this, you do want to make sure that you rub hard because you're going over that stencil. You need to make sure that the fine lines of this background stamp are actually connecting to the paper. So you'll watch me here. I'm going to lift this up, and I can see right in the middle, I did not get any pressure there. So I want to make sure to close that back and really rub that in. I am using one of the Chucky tools. My husband made this for me. But if you didn't have that, just make sure to press hard. Now, I do want to add a little bit more boldness to this. So I am going to stamp that for a second time. Now, as you can see, it totally covers up that stencil. And that's okay because we're still going to be able to use that stencil again. So I'm going to give this one more round, making sure to press really well in between that Christmas and the merry part. I can lift this up. And now what I'm going to do to show you guys how gorgeous this is, I'm going to blend in that ink that was on the outskirts of that stencil, or that stamp set rather, and I'm going to take that and blend it to the paper. So the outside of this image is going to be a tad bit darker, again, giving me just a little bit of contrast. But since I already had the ink on the Misty, I did not need to go back to my ink pad. And as you can see, it's really just deepening up around the edges. Now to get that just a tad bit darker so we really have our focal point to be towards the center of the card, I did decide just to bring in a little bit more ink. I'm not trying to cover up the ink I already have down. I'm just trying to deepen up those edges. And that's really going to allow that sentiment in the middle to pop. Now you can skip this part and not add all of this extra, but I do think it really makes this card stand out. Now, this is the magic part. I'm just going to grab my tweezers here and I'm going to lift up that stencil. And look how we have this inlaid kind of sentiment and our card is totally flat. There's no dimension to this card, but you already have your sentiment on there. And look how pretty that is. Now, mind you, that was with a stencil and a background stamp. We're going to try that again. This time, I'm just going to use 2 stencils. So I cleaned up my Merry Christmas again. I'm going to place that one more time right onto some sea glass paper. When you're using a PIXIE spray, you're going to have a lot of opportunities to reuse that stencil before you have to reapply anything. One more time, I'm going to come in with that SEAFOAM ink and I'm going to start the process again. Now, mind you, if you are doing this, you want to make sure that your inks and your papers match. Like I wouldn't suggest using a dark cardstock and then trying to blend a lighter color ink on top of it because that's not going to work. But if you start with a lighter red and go more into a burgundy, that's going to be fine. Also, if you had like a light green and you wanted to do the outsides of it blue, that will be fine as well. But I just want to make sure that if you're doing this technique, you want to make sure that your papers and your inks are coordinating. Now to add a little bit of depth to this card, I'm going to go right back to that ocean ink and deepen up just the sentiment. Before, remember, I came up from the outside and I did it. This time I'm just using that to deepen up the sentiment part, not so much the outside of the card this time. Now you can do this in so many color combinations and stencils and background stamps and it will look gorgeous. But this time I'm going to use that dots on dots. Another recommendation while we go ahead and ink blend this is to make sure that the scale of the 2 stencils work well together. Like I would not suggest using like really large circle stencils on this because you're not going to get that same effect. This one here has a whole bunch of different sizes of dots on here. Little, big, medium size dots on here. And that's going to be perfect. But if I were to use one that had like large dots, you're going to kind of miss the mark on this. You want to make sure that the stencil or the stamp set you're using has the line capacity or the design element that's going to allow that Merry Christmas to kind of pop through that design. Now I am going back to that ocean and I'm going to do that basically right down the middle of the card. I'm going to really deepen this up because I do want to have almost like an ombre effect. I want the center of my card to be a little bit darker and the outer portions of my cards to be, or my card panel rather, to be a little bit lighter. So I am going a little bit more heavy-handed towards the middle of the stencil. Now, once I have that ink blended on there, you're really starting to see that Merry Christmas come through, right? And that's what we want. I am going to go back right to that SEAFOAM and just put that on the outer edges of this stencil. And as you can see, I didn't even change my brush here because my colors are so similar together. I really didn't need to change up my brushes. All right, here is the magic. I love removing a good stencil. So I removed that first dots on dots and we have a great design, right? Now let's pull up that Merry and we're going to have that gorgeous Merry Christmas again, right in the middle of our card panel. And look how pretty this is. This is going to be flat to go through the mail, which is going to be perfect. I'm not going to have to add anything else to this. The only thing I want to add is just a white Jelly Roll pen to kind of highlight just the outline of my letters. And I'm not going, over every single part of this. I'm just going to add like some highlights to this. Now, if you wanted to, you can spritz this with shimmer, but I wanted to keep this as clean and simple as I possibly can because this is one, you guys, that you can totally mass produce. This card literally took me maybe 15 minutes. That is all. And look, I've had 2 cards in about 15 minutes. So you can see that with your color combinations with this, you could totally line up all your card panels, your inks. Just use these products I use here as far as the stamp and the sentiment, and you can go wild on those holiday cards. It's such a very clean and simple look, again, without a lot of bulk. And we only use stencils in the background stamp. That's all we did. So I do want to trim this down just a little bit because I do want to put this onto a white card panel. So I'm just going to trim this to about 4 by 5 1/4, and that will give me a nice white border when I go ahead and put these onto some white card panels. I have a tendency to cut from both sides, or I shouldn't say both sides, all 4 edges of my card panel, just so I know that my sentiment is going to be centered in the middle of that panel. But you can see how easy this is to do. Again, if you wanted to add maybe some snowflakes to this, you could do that and just stamp them on there. But I decided to keep these very clean and simple because, again, I could totally mass produce this design in several colors. All right, I went ahead and I grabbed 2 card panels, and we're going to have these folding at the top. So keep that in mind too. Whichever way your sentiment is running, that's going to be the way your card is going to fold. So my sentiment obviously is going horizontal, so I'm going to need a horizontal card panel. So leave a comment for me below if you think this is a great way to mass produce your holiday cards. I don't think it can be any simpler than this. Now, if you do not have a stencil like this, like the Merry Christmas, I would suggest maybe die cutting out a sentiment in a paper or masking tape and using that for this portion of the card making if you do not have a stencil that looks like this. Again, I'll have all of the supplies linked below in case you guys want to do a little bit of shopping and create the same exact 2 styles of cards. All right, everybody, that is the cards for today. We have just wrapped up day 5 of the holiday card series, and I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I will be back for day 6 very soon. Until then, everybody stay safe. Continue to make those holiday cards, and I will see you in just a few days. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you then. Bye-bye.